possibile iniziare ad apprendere?
Sì,
Sì.
no, è finito. E il lavoro da fare è qui.
Okay, so we hang the pictures. Just hang the pictures. Hang them and put plastic over them. To be an artist, to be a photographer, you have to nurture the things that most people discard. You have to keep them alive in order to tap them. That should be more dramatic. It's been important to me my whole life not to let go of any of the things that most people would throw in the ash can. I have to be in touch with my fragility, with the man in me and the woman in me, the child in me, the grandfather in me. Open it up more. All these things, they have to be kept alive. I think I do photograph what I'm afraid of. I think I have photographed what I was afraid of. Things that I couldn't deal with without the camera. My father's death, madness. But when I was young, women, I didn't understand. It gave me a sort of control over the situation that was legitimate because good work was being done. And by photographing what I was afraid of or what I was interested in, I explored and learned and laid the ghost. It got out of my system and onto the page.
Major funding for this program was provided by American Express, celebrating the world of creativity through American masters. The National Endowment for the Arts, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by annual financial support from viewers like you. Additional funding was provided by the following.
Images are fast replacing words as our primary language. They define our ideas of beauty, truth, and history. In our age, the photographer, not the philosopher, is king. By the 1950s, Richard Avedon emerged as fashion photography's brightest star. Since then, he has proved endlessly protean, tacking unpredictably from commerce to art and back again. Dominating one, challenging the other, and changing the rules of both. Today, his images are everywhere. Some have become iconic in our culture. Avedon, along with Irving Penn, has forever altered the terms of photographic portraiture. Penn gently, intently, Avedon radically and fiercely. He has changed the way we think about celebrity, showing its glitter but also its terrors. Few people refuse the validation of his portrait. It's the final recognition. And like others before him, Avedon has sought out the people we would forget. He went into the streets of Italy and Harlem, into mental institutions. He went to Vietnam, to the civil rights battles in the South, always following his political concerns. But he felt he couldn't compete with the great documentary photographers, Helen Levitt, Lisette Modell, Walker Evans. The found image couldn't satisfy him. He wanted to be a creator, not an observer. He has had major exhibitions in museums and galleries throughout the world. He's become one of the richest, most celebrated photographers ever, and one of the most controversial.
Thank you. Have you seen the show yet? Yes. Thank you.
Avedon has created controversy throughout his whole career.
He is not subtle.
He is a commercial photographer and an art photographer.
Bam.
And the twain
Here
were
it
not
is.
really allowed to meet.
And what do you think? You like it? You don't like it? It doesn't really matter.
He
to
is
me.
our Matthew Brady.
It just
He is the
glimmers into that
repository
extreme.
of the public personas of the century. Really.
Overkill, it's caricatural, everything grimaces.
I think he's a mortician with a real lack of compassion.
Power, energy. Energy more than anything else. Energy.
I don't know. I think he loves all these people a lot. You know, he's paying them a tremendous amount of attention.
Reality's the great collaborator. He's struggling against it.
Nobody has lasted as long as he
has a sort of sweep of the culture over a series of decades through a series of classes There's only one person who's been doing
He seems
it.
to have everything. He seems to be rich, good-looking, makes a lot of money.
He's just in your face all the time. You don't get a
lives in a magical world, is a fine artist. I think it's envy. I think
He's
a
so
lot of it is
over-emphatic,
envy.
as if we won't pick up any subtle nuance of character or openness of disclosure.
And he gets the nuances of character on a gut level with an extraordinary acuity.
I think he touches some kind of nerve.
Compassion and a heartlessness of observation.
His preoccupation with old age is a way of denying that it'll ever happen to him, and I think ultimately a way of denying death.
Somebody who says, look, it's crazy. It's madness.
He ultimately said, I am in control.
It's wonderful. That's what an artist should be. He should prevail.
I think those pictures will live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
In the summer of 1994, Richard Avedon went back to Paris to shoot the last 100 years of French fashion.
Fashion is one of the richest expressions of human desires, ambitions, needs, frailty, insecurity, security. Yes, beautiful. What we wear is an indication of our sense of ourselves. It's a gift. Fashion has been in all art history. Look at the Velasquez, look at the Goyas, look what they're wearing in the Whistlers. And what they're wearing is fashion. It's just staggering, Stephanie. Yeah, oh my God. I mean, that's
In many ways, Paris is where it all began for Avedon. It was 1946. World War II was just over when he arrived.
We'd just come out of a terrible, the worst time. Darkest dark that had ever been. Evilest evil that it ever had. And here were these pictures in the city of lying, you know, all of these people for whom the war was over, way over, never happened, gone, not talking about it.
Harper's Bazaar and Vogue eagerly took part in the first post-war stirrings in French couture. Covering the new collections was the gifted young photographer, Richard Avedon.
I was so young. I didn't know anything. I hadn't been anywhere. And was thrust forward by the editors of Harper's Bazaar. There was a mandate from Carmel Snow to help the French economy by bringing back the glamour of pre-war Paris. I was beside myself. I was in love with Doe. She was my model. You know, they made a movie called Funny Face, which had nothing to do with us, but a little bit about what happened. I remember riding in from the airport, and the taxi cabs in those days had open-top roofs. They were sort of square, and we'd buy a bottle of champagne in the airport and stand up all the way waiting to see the Eiffel Tower, drinking the champagne from the bottle, and there was no sleeping. You worked around the clock, and then you went out dancing. And then, of course, I worried. So after the dancing was over, I'd walk all night, worrying about the next pictures. There was the joy of discovery of everything French.
No one had ever seen anything like Avedon's pictures before. The streets seemed to burst off the page. Their vitality had tremendous shock value. In the 30s and 40s, fashion photography had been dominated by giants like Hoyningen Hunet, Cecil Beaton, Horst P. Horst, whose formal poses embodied the Art Deco tradition.
He changed the whole mood of fashion photography. Before him, every model posed. She became a statue. Whereas Dick, as I said, he participated. He was in the picture. And the way he moved with his Rolleiflex was as though he was dancing with you. And you would react, of course.
I wasn't without influence. The only fashion pictures that interested me were the fashion photographs of Martin Lucaci. They were of athletic women, striding across the breach, vital, alive, not leaning against a Grecian pillar. that impulse, you know, when you're 21 years old, there's a movement and humor and vitality and a sort of open, free sexuality is what I was drawn to.
Alexei Brodovich, the legendary Russian art director at Harper's Bazaar, was always looking for talent. The magazine was in its glory, publishing not only fashion, but masters such as Picasso, Capote, and Versailles.
Boy, was I lucky. I didn't realize when he chose me to work on the magazine that I would have Carmel Snow as my editor and Deanna Vreeland as my fashion editor. And I was like 19 or 20, and I went straight from the Merchant Marine, which meant straight from my home, to my mother, my new chosen mother, father, and crazy aunt. Brilliant crazy aunt. Brodovich was the father. He was really very much like my father. Very withdrawn and disciplined and very strong values. He gave no compliments, which killed a lot of young photographers. They couldn't take it. I didn't believe compliments. I never believed compliments, and to this day. So I responded to the kind of toughness, plus the aristocracy of mind and the standards. And then there was Carmel Snow. So the humanity came from Carmel Snow. She would say, at pictures I had done of Katharine Hepburn, and I had the one I loved, and she said, but Dick, that's a better picture, but look at what's in her eyes in this one. And right away, the graphics faded, the impact faded, and I saw the human quality, and that was what I got from Carmel, who taught me through gossip. Then there was Deanna Vreeland, the eccentric, the crazy aunt in the family who just exploded with imagination. Instead of saying, do this, we need that in the issue, she'd tell an anecdote. For example, I went to Egypt with Dovima, and she sent me a memo that said, Dick, before you plan these pictures, just think about Cleopatra. Think about those hot nights. She's walking on the roof. Everybody is so old. And she's this young, beautiful girl pacing that roof. She just sort of threw your way of thinking because of her erudition and because of her imagination and her, again, the addiction to perfection of those three people. And that's why those pictures hold.
There were other earlier influences. Avedon grew up in a family that knew about fashion. He was born in 1923 in Manhattan, where his father owned a woman's clothing store on Fifth Avenue. His mother encouraged his love of theater and ideas. She was his artistic muse. His sister taught him the poetry and pain of fashion.
Louise was, in a sense, my first model. Louise was my little sister, and her beauty was the event in the house. We all photographed Louise. Her shyness was never examined. My mother used to say, Louise, with skin like that and with eyes like that, you don't have to open your mouth. It's devastating, I guess. I'm not in the prediction business, and I can't say even now that this was the cause, but she pulled away from the world and withdrew. Spent the latter part of her life in a mental institution. When I began to photograph in my adult years, all the models that I was drawn to and the faces that I was drawn to were memories of my sister. And something that I knew about Louise, and of course my mother and my cousin Margie, the women in the house, would enter the photographs. Complicated, you know. The feeling as a child of women are simply another country. I will never understand them. That's in some of the pictures. Then the attraction to them. And that look in the mirror, that look of appraisal, and the anxiety that went along with it. Just that moment I'd seen so often was endlessly fascinating to me.
However subtle his insight, Avedon never forgot the dress, which was usually in motion. Late one night in a circus in Paris, Avedon captured movement, flowing fabric, and myth in one of photography's enduring images.
Dovima and the Elephants is a position in dance.
Dream sequence of a ballet. she's a heroine. She
Here's
stood
this
there between
fragile,
two gigantic beasts.
woman and these immense
Everything about them is
animals,
rough,
and
wrinkled,
it's
irregular.
The dress that makes it possible.
She's got her hand on a real elephant's trunk, and it looks like they're coming at her.
It's sanctuary. I mean, you could go anywhere in this dress. You could appear anywhere.
Obsessed with where all the elephant dung must be.
I think that
and
must be
how
what
stinky it must be.
And this is all about oppositions. Her utter slenderness. I mean, she is
standing there like the queen of the Nile and totally in control. But at the same time, it's a fantasy.
She has no idea.
The dress
She's
has nothing to
just
do with the elephant.
lost. Total narcissism. I love it. Divine.
She was so brave and so
I don't know what they're doing. They've obviously been trained to do that.
I saw the elephants under an enormous skylight, and in a second I knew I then had to find the right dress. And I knew that there was a potential here for the kind of dream image.
You have to think of it as a cascade, as like a waterfall. I mean, it's got its own power.
I look at that picture to this day, and I don't know why I didn't have the sash blowing out to the left to complete the line of the picture. The picture will always be a failure to me because that sash isn't out there.
Never satisfied, Avedon pushed on. He loved movement. It connected him to America's restless, transforming energy. It was the unifying link throughout his long fashion career.
One of the most powerful parts about movement is it's a constant surprise. You don't know what the fabric is going to do, what the hair is going to do. You can control it to a certain degree, and then there's a surprise. And also you have to remember that when I photograph movement, I have to anticipate that by the time it's happened, it's too late to photograph it. So there's this terrific interchange between the moving figure and myself that is like dancing.
And he would tell you higher, and you didn't even know how the hell you were going to jump higher with heels and the dress, and the wind was blowing in. Oh, come on, higher, and you just sort of just did it, you know. And then you had to look good at the same time. It wasn't easy.
You know all these jumping pictures that Dick shot in those years? Because he was jumping, and I was standing still. So I was stuck. I couldn't let it go that way, and he was jumping all over the place. So what he was projecting in what he wanted to do, let's call it fashion, was something that was coming from deep inside him. Like he was all over the place, and therefore a model should have been capable of being all over the place, even with just one long neck or an incredible hand. They had to have something incredible. I didn't have anything incredible, and that I didn't mind being invisible.
Avedon was always a director, not just of movement, but of narrative.
He brought a story to fashion. I mean, you got dressed, and
the thing is, he always gives you the clues. He's like a detective writer. He fills these pictures with the little things that tell you all about what you're seeing. The gloves, the wine, the cigarettes, the look.
On every face,
the look
there
of,
is a story.
Utterly chic boredom.
She's utterly confident.
The calculated awfulness of the people
She's not
who are
going to
down
lose
there.
those earrings or her Madame Grey dress. She's
where everybody is fixed on the next
kill.
second in time.
They're gamblers. This man, oh, I wouldn't want to get involved with him. I mean, he's sinister.
He sees stories wherever he goes, and he creates them when they're not there.
I think her husband's just left her. It's as simple as that.
In fact, what's really driving it, in my personal view, is this deeper, far more profound, genuine interest in the people he's seeking out, and in the stories they have to tell, and in the life experience they have. I mean, he's interested. He's omnivorous in the sense that the world fascinates him.
The era of enchantment was passing. The stories were getting darker. Whiffs of Antonioni's films, alienation, sexual ambiguity, the loss of privacy, the obsession with celebrity. While filming Cleopatra in Rome in 1962, Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor made love on and off the set. The whole world watched. In Paris, Richard Avedon staged a fashion shoot with Mike Nichols and Susie Parker. He was making his own satiric comment, and it nearly spun out of control.
People in the street who didn't even know what was going on came towards the car and started rocking the car. It was like Susie and Mike got frightened for a minute. It was really happening.
And Dick kept saying,
push harder, further, further. Run down the stairs, Susie, run down the stairs. And Susie ran down the stairs and tripped.
Could have broken my neck, for Pete's sake. Her high-heel shoes I was coming down the staircase with.
He was making a tabloid newspaper story within Harper's Bazaar, and we're talking the early 1960s in a fashion magazine. This is very strange. And later on, he took these things even further, and he started within Harper's Bazaar to criticize the world of beauty and fashion and to say, look what damage it's doing to these people. This was a very daring move in many ways. I mean, he was being a rebel and attacking the medium in which he was operating. And as he said, really, that was an end of it in a sense. He couldn't go any further with that. He had to stop. They would have stopped him anyway.
As the presence of the real world rose in his fashion work, Avedon's artistic passions went into his portraits and photojournalism. In 1966, feeling that Harper's great days were over, and needing to support his personal work, Avedon accepted Vogue's unprecedented $1 million offer. Avedon said the Vogue years were the beginning of compromise. He learned to separate his personal and his professional work. But there were still breakthroughs in the decades to come. The 60s saved him with his wild exotica. There were new frontiers of beauty in the 70s. Nastasia Kinski was a little zeitgeist bomb for the 80s.
She said, I love snakes. I mean, you take that snake in your hands, Polly, you can't imagine what it feels like. And I said, well, should we do a picture of a snake? Should we get a snake? I think, sure, let's ask Dick. So Dick came up and he thought it was a great idea. So the snake arrived. And after Nastasia started talking, you could tell when she held it that there was something really sensual about a snake. And I don't want to be vulgar, but I held the snake, and I can only tell you that it reminded me of something else.
When you look at the photograph, it all looks so easy. She spent 2 hours on a cement floor naked. The snake the trainer would start anchoring the snake with her ankles and then see where the snake would go. Hope that the snake, because there's no talking to a snake, that snake would creep up Nastasia in a way that was beautiful. Meanwhile, she'd roll back, she'd fall forward, the snake would come, the snake trainer would come and move the snake from one part of her body to another. I would catch pictures of his legs, flying out of the frame, but he'd be in the frame, the snake was going. It was really sort of a fashion hell.
And the snake started up her legs. She opened up one leg, the snake wound up her little naked body.
Calm and strong, smooth, big muscle.
And up onto her shoulder and go towards her face. And I said, Nastasia, this is it. Quickly relax.
And when it got to her ear, he kissed her with his tongue, and Dick got the picture. And I was crying.
She rose to the moment, the snake rose to the moment, I rose to the moment, and it was one of those absolutely magical things that happen when nothing you planned could equal the random
and I
accident
wasn't
of something
terrified,
beautiful.
I wasn't afraid. A wonderful feeling, actually. I love animals.
I couldn't speak. It was extraordinary, sexual, seductive, special, rare moment. And Dick Avedon caught the one time that snake kissed her ear.
Avedon put the image on a poster and sold 2 million copies.
I think there will be no way to write the history of fashion photography without Avedon.
I think we have an essential need for this.
He's tarred with the brush of fashion.
To embellish
he's
oneself.
Just a fashion photographer.
Some of his best work has been done in that area.
He's such a great fashion photographer because there's no conflict in those
And I
pictures.
wish that he would accept that.
Glamorous as hell.
Pride.
The danger here is that you become the costume.
Art has to deal with issues a little more profound than this year's hemline, or what perfume they're wearing, or what kind of style they're wearing.
Hollywood, American, Richard Avedon glamour.
Fashion is silliness made sacred.
Mannequins in
His
those
photographs made me want to
played
live
the
in New York.
and yet really matters to us all.
played.
I mean, this sounds so silly, but it's a dream about everything being one.
What's so moving about fashion is that it dies so young. It has no real afterlife or maturity.
When he left Vogue in 1988, he did not leave fashion, but as he has said, his interest had faded. He was still everywhere at once, at the Berlin Wall when it fell, on assignment for Egoiste, the French avant-garde magazine, leading the Versace campaigns, and breaking ground at the New Yorker as its first staff photographer.
Different animals have different kinds of eyes for accomplishing what their goals are. An eagle has a literal zoom lens in the eye so that from way above he can zoom down on the rodent that he's going to attack. In the same way, I think that my eyes always went towards what I was interested in, the face.
He's a great hunter.
He just sucks you into his eyes.
He's looking at something other than the surface of your face.
He sees.
It's very, very disconcerting.
They see right through you and beyond you.
He didn't want the cup and the saucer and the table and the chair and the background and the tree and the meadow. He wanted the face.
And I believe that it has made Avedon peculiar in some ways.
I think I'm some kind of a reader, some kind of a... I mean, I used to love handwriting analysis, but that's nothing compared to reading a face. I think if I had decided to go into the fortune-telling business, or whatever you call that, I probably would have been very good. What happens to me is that in work, I look for something in a face, and what I look for is contradiction, complexity, things that are contradictory and at the same time connected.
In his 50-year career, Avedon has never stopped exploring the complexity of the human face. He is an eclectic original, drawing from an array of sources: Lubitsch's movies, the stark frontal portraits of Nadar and Sander, the drama of Julia Cameron, the playfulness of Lartigue.
There are so many different things I've done at so many different times. There was one time when the face was like an explosion. For years, it was this explosion. When an explosion happens, you don't know where it's going to fly, where it's going to go, where the teeth are going to be, where the eye is going to be, what the contradictions are going to be within the face. Is this the laugh cynical? Is it ironic? Is it pain? Is it a scream? Is it all this concerned me, didn't concern me, just overtook me. And they were all facets of my feelings at that time, those years, that month, that day. Then later, very quiet, just very quiet. Everything needed to be very quiet, very uncomposed, very unexplosive. Andre, start by doing absolutely nothing. Don't have an idea in your head, just look right in the camera. I work out of a series of no's. No to distracting elements in a photograph. No to exquisite light. No to certain subject matter. Certain people are not people I can express myself through. No to props. That's not bad. Not bad. All these no's force me into the yes. And I have no help. I have a white background. I have the person I'm interested in and the thing that happens between us. If these were one of the Stalin portraits, if you were going to die tomorrow morning, do you think you would do anything differently? Why don't you just think that that's what's going to happen? Yeah.
To sit with Avedon and have him look at you is a fairly disconcerting experience because you realize that he's studying you. I don't know whether he's seeing inside you or not. I guess he would say he's not. But he wants to see everything there is to see on that surface. And this has been the making of him as a photographer.
But Johnny, even more, okay, to the camera, right? Look at this.
The strongest thing that Avedon's portraiture represents is a belief that finally, in the end, there's nothing but the face. And the truth is that the power of the landscape of the face, the crevices and the valleys and the promontories and all of the things that they represent, it's really how we know each other. There's nothing on earth more fascinating than the human face.
I think my being an autograph collector was a profound part of my childhood, and I had no idea of how eccentric it was and how important a role it played in who I became. It was about people who had achieved a certain quality in the world of the imagination and the world of the arts and law. It was crucial. It was absolutely crucial that I mean, I was a family gag. It was my way at the beginning of saying, I want to get out of this apartment, out of this family, out of this world, and this is the world I want to join. I want to be one of those people. So it started by getting their autographs. Then I started to photograph performers, actors, people who performed their emotions.
Dick's drawn to performance and to the performing self. His portraits of the clowns are sublime. They're probably the best and most poetic records of these cavorting hybrids that our century has. He understands the poignance of clowns, the sadness of them, the stoicism of them, the resignation. I've just been handed contact sheets of my father that I've never seen before, that my father considered the best photograph of him. It's odd that he should have that picture on. Oh, I can't do it. Sorry. It's very emotional. Sorry. My father in life was almost comatose at home. I mean, he would sit in his room and he was kind of inanimate almost, a kind of friendly absence. And when he went on stage, he was liberated, he was moving, he was kinetic, he was loud, he had words. And when Avedon photographed Dad, he started by photographing him as a sort of natty civilian. But he can't winkle out of my father his essence in his civilian clothes. So he gets him to dress up as Estragon. And suddenly, in a role, liberates what we, as his family, knew was the essential self, which was this grieving, terrified, furious, funny being. And what he was going for from the first shot was a kind of anatomy of grief, looking at it, trying to figure it out.
I sort of moved from photographing actors to directors to people later in my career whose emotions were real, not performed.
Avedon's attitude towards his subjects ranges from the tender to the caustic, but the truth, as he saw it, was always complex.
There are frightening elements in his work where he'll take a picture of somebody and allow parts of them to show that are truly frightening.
I only met Dorothy Parker once.
Dorothy Parker has taken
at
least a glance or two into the abyss.
This does not look like the live Dorothy Parker.
Very charming and very seductive.
See it in her eyes.
It doesn't look like the mind that was behind the face.
And when we left, Morse told me she was making fun of me the whole way, and I never knew it.
Very funny,
that portrait is a forecast.
Witty, and certainly a very bright woman with a razor-sharp mind.
It's a devastating picture. I mean, you can sit there and you can weep for
that
Dorothy.
She struggled against the depression and the alcoholism.
Even at that age, he could have been kinder to her. She looks...
A mugshot in a police station.
She looks like every bit of wit that she ever had just left her a second before that photograph was taken. And I know what he must have been doing. He must have been contrasting one of the world's greatest wits, one of the greatest wisecrackers, and a person who really knew how to have a good time, with their darker side. And he preserved forever an image of some inner truth of what she really had to go through in life.
Dorothy Parker turned up. She brought her face with her. Dorothy Parker had trained her dog. It was a really sour, funny lady who taught her dog to pee on pictures of Nixon. And so what you're looking at is a ravaged face, but that's what she brought to life, that sense of being ravaged by life.
The severity of the Parker portrait and others is heightened by Avedon's insistence on the white background. People without props, isolated, alone. It has become his signature, his private domain.
There are times when it's necessary to trick a sitter into what you want, but never for the sake of the trick.
1936 was the year the British crown lost out to one of Cupid's arrows. King Edward
This was a man who'd been a king and had given it up for a divorced American woman, had scandalized his subjects, and had really earned the scorn of his family and many people who knew him.
This is a frightening photograph.
Two-person
ghetto.
photograph.
She's
still trying to pretend that everything... No, she's not trying to pretend everything's okay. She's way past
so
that.
much.
But she's still trying to say that there's such a thing
life
as dignity. There's such a thing as class. He's past
Great
that.
unhappiness.
Look at them. They're the unhappiest people you ever saw. I don't remember them that way. I remember them as being very party-going and charming.
He's saying, don't take anything more away from me,
We're occupying a kind of limbo, if not hell. It was not warm enough to be hell.
They knew that they were being photographed, and they were nothing if not vain people. I wonder how he evoked that.
I would go every night to the casino in Nice, and I watched them. I watched the way she was with him, the way he was with her, the way they were with people. I wanted to bring out the loss of humanity in them, not the meanness. And there was a lot of meanness and a lot of narcissism. So that I knew exactly what I had to try to accomplish during the sitting. I photographed them in their hotel suite in New York. And they had their pug dogs, which they adored. And they had their Ladies' Home Journal cover faces on. They were posing royally. And nothing, not for a second, was anything that I'd observed when they were gambling presented to me. And I did a kind of, it's like living by your wits. I knew they loved their dogs. And I said, if I seem a little hesitant, a little disturbed, it's because my taxi ran over a dog. And both of their faces dropped because they love dogs a lot more than they love Jews. The expression on their faces is true because you can't evoke an expression that doesn't come out of the life of the person.
He's inside it and outside it at the same time. You see it with certain actors. Good actors know that you can't come to a conclusion about your character. But the very, very best of them can be inside and outside the character at the same time. And Dick is a master of doing both. But even something that's very much a judgment, like the Windsors, it's also from the point of view of the Windsors, too. You also think, yeah, it must be tough. It must be tough. Nothing in your life except appearances. A lifetime of appearances. It's not only, look how old, look how tired, look how empty. No. It's from our point of view and from their point of view simultaneously.
In a world obsessed with celebrity, Avedon has photographed most of them. He has seen their fragility and their terrors, and has been open to their genius.
One day the phone rang, and a voice said, "Is this Richard Avedon?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm Charles Chaplin." And I said, "Yes, well, it's not Richard Avedon, it's President Roosevelt." And I hung down the phone. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. He said, "This really is Charles Chaplin." I said, "Oh, my God." Well, please, he said, do you still want to photograph me? So I photographed him and said, thank you. And he said, are you all finished? And I said, yes. He said, now, may I do something for you? And I said, yes, of course. He said, are you ready? I said, yes. He put his head down. He came up furious, like this. And he said, no, I want to do it again. And then he came up with a big grin, the picture you're seeing here. And it was a gift. It was one of those moments in life when the light is perfect, the situation is there, and a gift is given to a photographer. All of you photographers must know about that, leaving room for the unexpected. Well, the next morning, the headlines of the newspaper that Charles Chaplin left America because of Senator McCarthy and the anti-communist craze. He had hidden in my studio, gotten onto a boat, and was out beyond the limits of the government, and this was his actual last message to America. See what a devil I am? There was no such person as Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was an invention of hers, a genius invention that she created like an author creates a character. So when Marilyn Monroe put on a sequin dress and danced in the studio, I mean, for hours she danced and sang and flirted and did this thing there's no describing what she did. She did Marilyn Monroe. I mean, just look at them. Look at her face in every single one of them. She is so present in the moment. And then there was the inevitable drop, because she was someone who went very high up and very way down. And when the night was over, she sat in the corner like a child with everything gone. But I wouldn't photograph her without her knowledge of it. And as I came with the camera, I saw that she was not saying no.
Avedon's pictures don't always succeed, especially when the idea overwhelms the image. At his best, Avedon's intuitions win out.
The most peculiar thing I could think of is to be shot with cards flying all around in double exposure. So I wound up writing a note to him saying, Dear Mr. Avedon, I'm a longtime admirer of yours and I welcome this session, but my entire career I've kept away from, I think I called it the prototypical iconography of my art. Double, multiple images and it felt very awkward to write this note to him. And in the process, while the note was being delivered, there was a second message on the machine, which from Dick saying, "I'm so excited. I'm home. I'm practicing with cards. There are cards everywhere. I'm shooting multiple images. I'm so excited." You know, literally the same moment that this note is being delivered before this, the last communique from him is that he wants to shoot me much like he shot this recent photograph of Al Sharpton, with many multiple images. Now, I don't know how to say this delicately. I guess the best thing to say is it is not my favorite photograph of Dick Avedon's, with these many, many shapes and images and eyes of Al Sharpton heaped together as this double image. So now I'm really, he goes behind the camera, and I'm now flinging cards into the air, and he's winding up to do double exposures. This whole thing seems very odd. I like that. And I guess you'd now think this is the end of the story, but I remember the next day there was a call again from Dick saying, "I'm very excited, everything went tremendously. I'm working on two things, a spread of two different photos. I mean, one with the double exposures. The way they've come together is wonderful. Your third eye is really powerful." Those were his exact words. Of course, I haven't seen any of this. And then, again, there's a subsequent call, and now, you know, he's decided, maybe reading my mind, that the picture where I look quite stern and just have the corner of the Jack of Spades in my hand is what he'd like to use. And eventually he did. And I told him that it got me many job offers as an assassin in films. So I was very happy with it.
It was his idea to tear the Jack. And the minute he did it, he added something so unexplainable and so mysterious to the photograph.
Clearly you read things into the surface of his pictures of famous people because you know who you're looking at. But you also, the fact that he's photographed so many people that aren't famous, so many people that are in fact nobodies, and you read a lot into those, kind of gives these people the dignity that they deserve and allows you to see more into them. I think ultimately what you see more into, though, is inside his head. It's like reverse photography. It's like the light's coming out of his brain, through his eyeballs, and he's shining it on the people. And what he's photographing it's never not a self-portrait. And what you're seeing with ever-increasing crystal clarity is Dick. You're just seeing him.
It strikes me that Avedon is looking through the camera, looking at other people, trying to find the truth about them as a way of composing an image of himself. There's something of a quest here, of a search. These are fragments of his own face. When I came upon the pictures of Oscar Levant, I didn't know who it was. I thought it might be Rasputin, because they struck me as pictures of a divine madman. And in a way, they're the paradigm for the whole show. Because in them, in this face of this, with its overbite and its soulfulness and its grotesquerie, he's captured all the qualities that he seems to have been looking for in his other subjects.
He walked down the stairs in his bathrobe, a bathrobe with food stains on it, with absolutely no narcissism. He was the wide range of things I'd always dealt with. Creative genius, emotional distress, someone on the edge of insanity. And it was a conscious decision. He was doing what I have always said I would like to give to a photographer I respected. What he had to give to the camera was all the complexity of every theme I had ever dealt with. And what a gift to me. I mean, what a gift he gave me.
Avedon's subjects are not always willing to submit to his ideas, especially when they consider themselves visionaries in their own right, and the sitting can become a battle of wills.
Dennison was a ravenous woman, greedy for life, greedy for experience, and in a more down-to-earth way, greedy for food. She was an anorexic. She starved herself. She said she wanted to be the thinnest person in the universe. Avedon catches the greed. He catches the ravenousness in her. She thought the picture was cruel. She thought it was ungallant. She thought it was unforgivable, even though she might have, since she had such a respect for the truth, seen its justice. Who has control of the sitting, the subject or the photographer? And what Avedon makes clear in his portraits of masters is that he is the one in control. He will make you beautiful. He will make you grotesque. They're his pictures. So the question of whose pictures are they is a fundamental one.
What Richard Avedon did with portraiture was to steal the fire that had always been the prerogative of sculptors and painters. He said, "This will be mine." He changed the relationship between the portraitist and the sitter. And instead of it being a collaboration, which photography typically is, he said, "You're mine, you're here, I'm taking you over. Your surfaces, I will make my own." And that was an enormous leap for photography, because it said, yes, photography's real, yes, it's true, but it's also a work of art, and it can be malleable as clay. And the relationship between Dick and his sitters was the relationship between a sculptor and his clay.
Oh, I have to get this one. Wait. He needs more red. Would you please? That's enough. Now, Lauren, come on. Oh, I can't stand this, Dick. Lauren, that's fantastic.
People would come to him and they'd say, well, we've got this product, and June Rope was a material company, I believe. And Dick said to them, well, let us dispense with the actual business. He said, all you have to do is sell the dream. You have to sell an illusion. You have to show an idea of glamour and associate your name with it. And this was a very early idea.
He's here. Get the film.
In Avedon's commercial work, very early on, he seemed to come to the realization that this was not about the product. It was about the having of the product. You didn't have to hold the product up and say, buy me. You held up the person, or you held up the situation, or you held up the little playlet that he would create.
can do it.
Sure you can. Trust me.
And say, buy this feeling.
You make me so happy. Oh, you.
It's fun. The food is good. The thing is silly. And the people you meet are... the respect that I have for the hairdressers, for the art directors, for the county executives, and what they live through with their clients who don't get what they're trying to do. It's like a little circus of intention, of hard, disciplined, crafted work to sell. This is a capitalist country. To sell the products that are made that people seem to want. I don't think I have the heart to go into the black side of myself without any respite. If I lived with the dark side of myself all the time, I think that I'd be non-functional. Thank you. Beautiful. But this lighting, which it's easy to do. Where your chin is here. And there's no downside to my commercial photography. And, yes, good. And go with the lead. Wait a minute. No, mouth open and kind of, and leave. Leave her alone. Leave her alone. Don't touch her hair. I am so grateful that I have the capacity and the ability to make a living, support my family, which is the definition of being a man from my generation, support my studios, support my special projects by doing advertising. The Pirelli calendar or a Versace campaign, or in the old days, covers of Vogue. It is a sort of holiday.
I dread to think what became of her. That haunting, exquisite creature. A note of music. Save me. A thoughtless word from anyone.
These things are very complicated, very structured. You have to tell your story, a full story in 30 seconds. That's like a haiku. That's like the most complicated form of poetry.
Between love and madness lies obsession.
Coco's coming. Was that aroma in the back dress? You don't mention Coco.
In the Coco commercial, in which a girl named Coco has gone to the opera, she trips, but her pocketbook, her Chanel bag, flies open. The perfume flips. She has to make a decision. Does she go for the perfume or does she go for the man? She's in full air, falling at the moment that this goes through her mind. She chooses the perfume, makes a football leap, catches the perfume, lands at the bottom of the stairs. The place is now empty except for the one man who's at the top of the stairs, who looks down and says the last line, which I've forgotten.
I'd give anything for another whiff of Coco.
Avedon was the first person to come into photography as a fashion photographer, as a commercial photographer, and then, in a sense, declare himself an artist. And that was not well received. And he declared himself an artist quite vociferously. He didn't get all shy about it and say, "Oh, please accept me." He said, "Here I am, get out of the way." And it goes on till this day. People excoriate him for his ego and for his own self-aggrandizement or self-selling. And if he hadn't done that, we might still not know about him. He wouldn't be getting the museum shows because that wasn't something that people would have come to him to ask him to do. The nature of the photographic world was just simply too tense and too boundaried for that sort of thing.
In 1994, Avedon's pictures of his dying father went on exhibition in Cologne. These harrowing portraits were originally shown in 1974 in New York City's Museum of Modern Art, the most influential force in contemporary photography. That exhibit was a long-awaited recognition from the art establishment. For Avedon, remembering his father is complicated. There was little that drew the young Richard to the embittered, remote head of the family. His emotional connection was to his vivid, theatrical mother. There are no childhood photographs of Avedon with his father. His pictures of fathers with children are filled with longing, fantasies of moments that never happened.
The photographs of my father, the making of those photographs, had nothing to do with the art of photography. It had to do with my way of trying to reach him, trying to let him know who I was, because everything about the two of us was on his terms. I went into business with him. I listened to, I knew him very well. I knew what he suffered as a child in an orphan asylum on the Lower East Side, taken away from his mother, with a father who deserted him. I loved him, but we never spoke the same language.
He was a man who had the typical life of a Russian Jewish immigrant, which was one of tremendous suffering and struggle in this country. And he made his career in the schmata business, as they all did, got onto Fifth Avenue on 41st Street and opened a fashion department store called Avedon's and lost the whole thing in the Depression, probably literally on Black Friday, if not within a week of it. And his entire life was only able to express emotion through discussing money and material objects.
He felt the early pictures were unflattering and terrible photographs. And I thought, I've got to write to him so that he can't dismiss it or not hear it. What I love about you is that you're in your 80s, you're hungry, you're avid for life, you're buying marinas, you're on the telephone with a kind of vitality and pain and excitement and all the complex things that I know, and I love that in you, and that's who I love, and that's who I want to photograph. He never answered, but when he died, in his closet, in his coat jacket that he wore all the time, was that letter.
So the photographs that he took of him in the last stages of cancer, as he was attacked by one critic for, obviously reflect his anger and bitterness towards his father for the neglect that his father showed him as he was growing up. But I also think that's too simple. They also show a great deal of tenderness because they reflect the man's suffering at the end of his life.
I don't know what those photographs mean. I was in analysis at the time, on and off, and it occurred to me years later that maybe photographing him was an act of hostility. Shooting, killing him with my camera, watching him die with my camera. And I said to the analyst, could it possibly be that I was telling myself that this was about love and connection and it really was a kind of murder? And he said, yes, of course. I said, well, you're an analyst. Why didn't you tell me? Isn't that your job? And he said, I never interfere with the creative process unless damage is being done. No damage was being done, and fine photography was the result.
But when I saw the photographs, I was upset by them because I felt it was an invasion of privacy. And that, of course, is the very essence of being a photographer. It's an invasive, in many ways, art form.
It's just strange to me that anyone would ever think that a work of art shouldn't be disturbing or shouldn't be invasive. I mean, that's the property of a work of art. That's the arena of a work of art. It's to disturb. It's to make you think. It's to make you feel. It's a kind of... I mean, if my work didn't disturb from time to time, it would be a failure in my own eyes. It's meant to disturb in a positive way.
I found them an absolute assault.
Dick is looking at death.
Full of rage.
Trying to face it down and also trying to understand
rage.
what it must be like.
Something that denies the inevitable and yet something that is
it's an act of love.
His father in his hospital gown and
mourning.
And you imagine that here is Avedon, the son of this man who is dying.
Propped him up and put a shirt and tie on him. We're talking about photographing the dead.
Death is the great teacher. This force is a personal force.
The end of things. And people turning into just pure energy and disappearing.
I see terror here, awaiting execution.
He's honoring him. He's somebody he loved.
Incredibly moving.
Makes me feel that he had disrespect for his father.
One is brought into the sanctuary of something holy.
My son, why hast thou forsaken me?
They are about everybody's dialogue with
their mother and their father until the end of their life. Do you love us? Did you always love us? What is it all about? Can you give me any last piece of advice before you go on your way? And didn't I get it right at all? Tell me something.
The body is there, but it's already beginning to disappear. And what we're seeing is a person literally becoming light.
We're all skulls. And I look at that photograph and I see his skull. And then I wonder, what if we went around and we related to each other as if we were all skulls? That we're all going to die, and whenever we die, it's going to be too soon. Everything else is irrelevant. Race, religion, gender, all the squabbles we get into is irrelevant to the fact that in the end, we all look alike. We're skulls. And so that's what I've lived with and learned from that, you know, from that photograph.
I think my best work as a body of work is in the American West. I did the Western pictures when I was about 60. And I think that being 60 is very different from being 30 and 40 and 50. You begin to get a sense of your own mortality. I think my aging, the sort of stepping into the last big chapters, was embedded in this body of work. There's a deeper connection to those people who were strangers because of my condition at that time.
In 1974, Avedon fell dangerously ill with an inflammation of the heart. He refused to stop working. A second attack was life-threatening. He went out west to recuperate and discovered his next major project. It took him 5 years, a sweeping chronicle of a part of America he had never photographed before. Drifters, loners, ordinary working people. Critics loved it or hated it. He was praised for his tough, unrelenting vision, and at the same time was charged with exploiting his subjects and falsifying the West.
The book was called In the American West, which really set off an enormous hostile response to the book. What was an East Coast successful photographer doing, photographing working class people in the West? Was this really the West? And what was he doing?
In the summer of 1994, Richard Avedon returned with this film crew to revisit some of the sitters. He encountered difficult questions and some startling responses. For Billy Mudd, Avedon's portrait broke a lifetime of isolation.
I've been in the depressed stage and the loneliness so much that I've even went as far as checking out of this world. Got tired of it and just shot myself.
He had been living a dangerous life, hauling dynamite. Disconnected, lonely, away from home for long periods of time.
It starts with your eyes, the pale eyes.
When Billy Mudd first saw his portrait, it was hanging outside the Amon Carter Museum. When he looked up, there he was, 10 feet tall.
Like an out-of-body experience.
And it terrified me because I seen myself looking at myself in no way that a mirror could ever capture it or a photograph off a little Polaroid camera, because it's small. This blowed up to where I was looking at myself. And I thought I was dead. I actually experienced myself capturing myself and saying, you better change your life, son. This is the way it is.
And it was a transforming experience. Billy changed his job and returned to his family. Sandra Bennett was photographed when she was 12 and found herself on the cover of Avedon's book at 18.
And the picture was awful. And it was, you know, your worst hair day, clothes day, and everything all in one day, the worst photo of your life that you want to bury. And it was right there on the front of this book. And I was mortified. I was a senior in high school. I was homecoming queen, and I had this photo coming back to haunt me.
She wants to know, Whose truth was in that portrait?
And so what was very difficult for me was that you caught me, you say vulnerable here. That was true, but also bare bottom, really exposed, where I try to cover everything. My girlfriends would wear shorts in the summertime, I wouldn't.
But what were you covering, the freckles?
The freckles, oh, absolutely.
You can't say you weren't in the picture. That's what's so confusing about photography. You can't say you weren't there.
Right.
But you have to accept that you are there and the control is with the photographer. I have the control in the end, but I can't do it alone. You have a lot to say, which by that I mean the way you look, the way you confront the camera, or the experience, whether you're trusting or not trusting. You have a certain amount of control. In the end, I can tear the pictures up, I can choose the smiling one or the serious one, or I can exaggerate something through the printing. It's lending yourself to artists.
I think the larger issue is that photography is not reportage, is not journalism, is fiction. When I go to the West and I do the working class, which is more about the working class than it is about the West, it's my view. Like John Wayne is Hollywood's view. So that means my idea about the working class is a fiction.
This never happened. I created it without any idea of how I was going to photograph it or who I was going to photograph. I drew it after it came to me in a dream. I thought of it as the way a painter would think of what he wanted to paint.
I put advertisements in the beekeeping journals, and I explained that I needed someone who would permit bees to be on their body.
So I can still remember going past and under the trees, all these packages of bees. And I said, oh my God, they're packaged bees. And Dr. Gary said, don't worry, everything's under control.
We need the fluid of the queen bee, and we rub that on the body, and where we put it, the bees come, and they don't sting unless you touch them.
Richard Avedon said, now remember, you can't move because any movement will be a blur. At which point my knees were starting to shake a little bit, and I said, well, how am I going to overcome that? And I just sort of locked my knees in, and hopefully I didn't move. I had anywhere from 500 to 800 bees on my chest, and you just never knew what was going to happen.
If you don't move,
I could not say anything because if I opened my mouth, bees would fly in.
So if they're in your ears, and it sounds like a jet engine.
We did get stung.
It does.
Probably all of us got stung. I got stung several times.
Really got stung. In the end, I finished 2 pictures of Ronald. One was what I called a portrait of Christian martyrdom. You feel his suffering from the stings of bees in his expression, and he resembles a Lazarus coming back from the dead, covered with worms. And then there was the other one, in which he removed himself. It's more of a Buddhist image of a man quietly enduring the trials of the world.
In visual terms, there has been nothing like photography in the history of the world. There's no vocabulary for it. The vocabulary has to do with painting. Photography literally stops something dead. It's the death of the moment. The second a picture is taken, that life is held and stopped and over. That moment is over. It's part of the melancholy, part of the beauty of what is a photograph. And the thing that has happened to me lately is this sense that I didn't take the photographs, that they have a life of their own. It's endlessly mysterious to me. Since I was a child, the rooms I've been in have been an extension of myself. My rage, my joy, my enthusiasms, everything that means something to me in the end ends up in the room that I'm in. It's a much more intense room and comforting
because the intensity seems to get out of me and onto the walls. These are things given to me, things found, friends. That's my son, John. Oh, this is Evie and I, the year we met before we were married. There's so much in that picture, so much love. Then I have packages that I've never opened, and they're expressly for the purpose of not opening them. I asked the person who sent them to me to put something in that I could read in a moment of real distress. If I was planning to die, I would like to open this as a message from someone I loved. These little stones come from a beach off of Patmos, and you're free to sit there and spend hours studying these stones. And I tried to look for faces. And the first one I found was this smiling mouth, this grin. And it's a little bit scary. They're all a little bit scary. This one is really strange, because you see the mouth, the eye, the nose. It's sort of like a skull, a little malevolent. And this is a funny one. Big mouth, smiling, a nose, an eye. I mean, they're so beautiful and so surprising, and no two alike, like faces. Now, what's happened in the last year of this year of my going public is that this room has been destroyed. The unconscious organization of it is gone. And the organization of my life is gone at this moment, because the past doesn't seem useful to me now. And I don't know exactly where I'm headed. I don't want to be burdened with old enthusiasms or angers or the comfort of my old feelings. It's the closing of one door and maybe the opening of another.
In the last few years, Avedon has moved at a dizzying pace. 4 major retrospectives in New York, Cologne, Milan, and London. 2 new books of portraits summing up a life's work, and 6 more under contract.
I've become my own widow. I'm in charge of my archives. I create books. I create exhibitions. But it will be over. And when it's over, then I'll read and rest and begin to be a photographer again, I hope. My God, in the question of being an older man with passion, is Matisse, because when one would have thought he had done everything, he got into bed and he recreated color and did the most beautiful work of his life and most modern work of his life. If I can be reborn for the few years that are left to me, it would make me very happy. And if not, I'll either really go with full force or I'll stop.
Montauk is Avedon's summer home in Long Island. He built it for his grandchildren, for time with his son, to relax with friends, and for periods of rest, which he rarely takes.
One of the great joys in life is watching light. To spend an afternoon in Montauk and watch the light move and the light change and a cloud cross the sun. The lessons to be learned about light by just observing.
I think it's something about madness, rage, and energy that connects us. I mean, there's something other than
love of good food,
love of apples.
Women,
yes,
love
beautiful.
of apples.
That's true.
Yeah.
You could become an apple farmer. You know, doing what? Photographing.
We have so many apples that you don't know what to do with them.
Sell them.
Sell them or kill them?
Take the chickens. Become a farmer. Become a gentleman farmer.
I don't know about you. I don't have many men friends that I can talk to about everything, where there's no macho competition going on, although we certainly are competing. I mean, I want your Uncle Vanya to be a success tomorrow. On the other hand,
look at that
only if my book.
Ravaged with jealousy.
No, I'm not. But I just don't want you to be more successful than I am.
Believe me, I won't be.
You will. You're onto something absolutely wonderful. We live in a world of images. First of all, images have replaced language, have replaced reading. The responsibility to your role in history, in whatever's going to happen to human beings, you are the new writers. And we can no longer be sloppy about what we do with a camera. Undoubtedly resentful. You have this weapon in your hands. It's a camera. And it's going to teach the world, it's going to record the world, it's going to explain to the world and to the children that are coming what this world was like. It's an incredible responsibility.
I think he's touched every one of us in a really profound way. You know, when he really responds to something, it's just terrifying. You know, what do you do next? You know, how can you possibly top that?
Dick says, get down there, shoot the job, and get it over with, you know, and make it brilliant. It's a totally different method of teaching.
We looked together what I did. Some he was very critical, some almost outraged. What are you thinking, do this? I said, I don't know. I said, well, you better know. It's your photograph. Typical. Again, you know, sort of to the point. No, what do you call it, nursing you.
Maybe because he lives with darkness and light so much emotionally himself that he can find both sides of every person in a great photograph.
To be human is to be dense, mysterious, and inexplicable. And I think that's what Dick goes after. And that's always contradictions. He simply sees reality. That's the way reality is. One of the things that's very gutsy about Dick is he lives his contradiction.
He is almost the point of a neurotically flamboyant. One moment, next minute, he's totally opposite. He's a chameleon. He moves and twists and changes the shape, not only color.
One day he'll be king of the world, don't bother me, I'm on top, just get out of my face, you know, trying to organize me. I know what I'm doing. And then the next day he'll be saying, you know, that picture just wasn't good enough. It was just ridiculous. I made a mess of this. I overscheduled myself. I need a vacation. And I love that about Dick, that there is a very sort of human quality to his flights of hubris.
What you don't know, how dare you say this publicly, Norma? What you don't know is that without Norma, I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning.
Yes, you
the
would.
phone rings and she runs the studio. She makes everything work. She's okay. Enough.
We all think of him as such a social being. He's so apparently at ease with himself. He's such a wonderful raconteur. He's always looks so wonderful and looks so poised. And yet, if you talk to him about what his deepest terrors are, and what his conception of himself is, he will tell you that he feels he's the most isolated person in the world. And I think this sense of isolation projects so well into documenting kind of elegant crowds like the photograph of the Volpi Ball, in which people are supposed to be having a wonderful time together, and yet you feel this tragic isolation of every human being.
This is good. There's only one last thing. It's really very good.
But I think that in the end, he cares about work first. And I don't think that's ever forgotten. And I think you see it in the work. I think that's the way you get work like that.
When you get into the area of the art, which is private, which he's really speaking to himself in this tyrannical inner voice, wanting to get it right, wanting to be great. When you engage with that, there's no argument, there's no discussion. It's a completely controlling, autocratic, non-negotiable thing.
Her head is a beautiful shape, right?
Dick was very energetic, very with it, always ahead of the time, always discovering things. I don't think there was any other place in the world that I could get better experience. But he controls the media, he controls his design, he controls his everything that comes out of Dick Avedon. has Dick Avedon's approval. And I think if he had the choice, he would control the critics, he would control every article that comes out about him. That's his nature.
You know, he's a complicated person. Everybody's complicated. He sees the tragedy, and a lot of his work has reflected that. But he's never lost, in the face of the suffering, the exuberance for the pleasures. It seems invulnerable. He will barge in because he thinks there's great fun to be had.
His great gift with people is that he brings so much energy to it, and some new cheese and the caviar and the champagne in him. And he has the joke that you haven't heard yet. He's forever astonished by life, and then that does something to people. You have a good time.
I mean, I'm such a Jew, but I don't, at the same time, I'm completely, is it agnostic? Someone who doesn't believe in anything.
On the other hand, I remember, you remember that story? Wasn't there something about a synagogue?
I went to the synagogue in Venice.
My father, who has absolutely no religious sentiment of any kind and has no cultural sentiment in terms of Jewish culture, has a very standard Jewish personality, if that's not too big a generalization to make. And by that I mean he thrives on anxiety. It's a way of life. And as opposed to the standard view of stress as shortening one's life, I think it actually it's a form of internal exercise. It's going at all times and it keeps you young. And in his case, definitely that's true.
And the Torah was very old, and on 2 sticks, it's a scroll that rolls up. And he took my hand and put my hand, both hands, one on each stick. And he started to speak in Hebrew, and it was up to me, it was clear, it was up to me to repeat what he said. He is Gadal, he is Gadash, and I said, he is Gadal, he is Gadash. And all of a sudden, something, this is my only experience of this kind of my entire life, something came through me from the beginning of time. I mean, I felt that I was connected to something. Not Jungian, I mean, primal, in the genes. I mean, something that went way, way, way back, because one gene is connected to the next gene, and this was something in me that was a Jew. I've never felt like that in my life.
And you were physically shaking?
Shaking, yeah. I was shaking, my hands were shaking, and I'm not someone who gets, you know...
So how do you explain that?
I don't. I wouldn't try to explain it. I could have brought all these feelings buried in me to this moment. I don't believe message was being sent to me. But I was touching, in the Oda Synagogue, in Europe, touching an ancient Torah that went back to way, way past any way of tracing my genetic structure.
I have trouble believing it doesn't have some kind of meaning. I don't know how you can spend your entire life dealing with light and not get some perception of the mysterious.
Dick always grapples with whatever concerns him. I think most of us turn away from it, or at least partly away from it. And he always looks it right in the eye. And since a great photograph has, with all its other characteristics, has that one that I was talking about earlier, that it doesn't come to any ultimate conclusion. It never closes the issue. There are always things left open, undecided, not yet dealt with, things for later, things for us to think about. I think that's his essential act, is to walk up to what gives him pause and say, snap.
I know where your work's going in the next period.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, you're going to be
Are you going to
photographing.
share this with me?
Yes, I will share it with you. Amazing photographs of young monks, young nuns, young mystics.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, my boy. You're very welcome.
That'll be enough for today.